All right, good afternoon. Thanks very much. If you smelled something very bad when you walked in here, excuse me, that was me. No, it was the fins. So hopefully no one is sick from the smell. So I'm going to be talking about a visual identification guide for the CITES, the 5 new CITES shark species. This is a guide for their first dorsal fins in trade, and I'd like to point out my co-author, Deborah Abercrombie. She's my wife as well, and it's her birthday. And I'd also like to point out that she discovered the extra scalloped hammerhead several years ago. So I know it's going to cause problems, but she always causes problems for me. So no, she solves problems for me. Okay, so yeah. So anyway, there's some virus or something going on here, and I'd like to point out Carrie Lynn Miller, who's from Pew Charitable Trust, and Pew was the organization that funded the development of this particular guide. So I'm going to give a bit of background. We've been talking a lot about shark fins and shark fin trade, and I'm going to try to provide a little bit of background. So this is a shark fin. This is what we call the wet fin. This is the fin that's just been removed from the shark's body. So you can see it's sort of glistening. It's still got a lot of moisture in it. So that's the product that fishermen have in their hands. And you might ask, why are they taking these fins? Well, the reason is because of that. The shark fin soup in the top corner. Shark fin soup is a delicacy in parts of Asia, in China, Hong Kong, Singapore, Thailand. The shark fin soup retails for about $100 a bowl, and it's something that they eat at special occasions like weddings and banquets and big business dinners. And it's very much a luxury dish. It's a status symbol to show that you have generosity to your guests, that you provide the shark fin soup. And the soup actually doesn't really have a taste. It has more of a texture. And the fin, this is actually an X-ray of a shark dorsal fin. And can you guys see these lines right here? So that's actually sort of the key thing. Those lines are called serratitricia. They're made of collagen protein, and we also call them the fin needles. And those fin needles are what makes up the broth of the soup, and that's what they're eating. You also notice that in the X-ray we see these dark pieces here. This is cartilage, just like you have in your ear, and that's actually trimmed away from the fin before they make it into the soup. Their cartilage is not actually what they're trying to eat. The reason I highlight this is that different sharks have a different amount of fin needles versus cartilage. So certain species have a higher economic value than others because they have more of that material. And actually certain fins on the shark have more of that material. So the lower part of the tail has a lot of that. It has no cartilage, and that's actually the most valuable fin, is the lower caudal lobe, typically. So when sharks are caught for the fin trade, the primary fins that are sold, or the most valuable ones, are the 2 pectoral fins, the lower lobe of the tail, and the first dorsal. Those are the sort of what we call the primary fins. The other fins we call secondary, and those ones are sometimes traded as well, but the big high-value product is those primary fins. So typically, I'm not an expert on how this works in every country, but we've been to a lot of countries looking at how the shark fin trade works, and this provides a little bit of an overview of which is probably quite typical. So obviously that's the wet fin that comes off the shark. That's what the fishermen initially have. And the fishermen will usually dry the fins themselves. And when I say dry them, they just put them out in the sun, and they dry out, they desiccate they change shape a little bit. But when they dry the fin like that, you see it still retains the same markings that it originally had. It still has the same color and the same basic shape. So the fishermen might dry it, but typically in most countries, there are a small number of shark fin exporters. So you have a lot of fishermen, but you have a small number of people that are exporting the fins to Asia. And that's the real bottleneck. That's the real opportunity, because those people are the ones you can target to actually make sure the CITES permitting is working. So the fin traders, the exporters, will be exporting these products predominantly, these dried fins with the skin still on, and that's what's going to go to Asia. That's what most customs and border control people are going to encounter when they're looking at shark fins. So once that crosses borders, once they go to Asia, they actually skin the fin. They remove all of the outside of the skin. They treat it with chemicals like bleach or formaldehyde, and it gives us this white color. And that's how it's packaged, and then it's sold to restaurants or to individual consumers, and that's how it becomes the soup. So we've developed this visual fin identification guide because in September 2014, countries are going to have to be issuing CITES permits, be monitoring for CITES-listed species. So in September 2014, border control people are going to have to be able to recognize the fins from these particular species in this condition. And it sounds very daunting. To lay people, you don't think that shark fins, like all fins, look alike. But it turns out that not all shark fins look alike. They are actually quite different. And I'll provide some evidence of that. I mean, we can look. This is 7 first dorsal fins from 7 different species. And I think we can all say they don't look identical. They have different shapes. They have different markings. So I'm going to teach you about what we do to use those characters to actually identify them. So John Hyde is going to be talking a lot more about DNA. So Deborah and I both do DNA analysis as well. And we actually came to learn how to visually identify fins because we did DNA testing of fins. And we ended up looking at lots and lots of fins and realizing they actually look different before we even did the DNA test. But John's going to cover that in much more detail. And of course, we heard some of it this morning. As soon as we say the word DNA, people go, "Oh my God, how much is that going to cost?" And you're right. DNA. I think if you're envisioning all the thousands and thousands of fins that are being exported from a country, and you think that you're going to be DNA testing every single one to find these CITES species, that would cost a lot of money and that would take a lot of time. But the reality is that you're probably only going to have to test a very small percentage. And what we're trying to do is show you that you can actually visually pick the fins of these CITES species out. So you might have 1,000 fins, but you could pick out 5 or 10 that are the ones that are CITES species. And that's really going to cut costs of DNA testing, going from large numbers to small numbers. So this guide is really to help do that. So our question again, can they be visually identified to the species level? Now, we already know, this is an interesting fact, not too many people know. This paper published in 2006, Deborah was actually a co-author on this research. In Hong Kong, the shark fin traders have never ever seen the whole animal. They've never seen the whole animal, but they get these fins in from your countries, and they sort them into piles. And each one has a different trade name, and those trade names each have a different value, all right? So the reason they have different trade names and different values is because some of the fins have more of those needles. So the ones with the more needles, the ones they like, those they have a high price. So Deborah and some of the others, they DNA tested fins in Hong Kong that had been sorted into these piles to see if those trade names matched up with species. And sure enough, many of them did. In fact, this trade name right here was 100% concordant with oceanic whitetip, which is one of the species that the Border Control are going to have to be looking for. These two trade categories matched up perfectly with hammerheads. And the reason, again, hammerheads have particularly valuable fins. Their fins might fetch $150 a kilo. So this is why they were able to sort these very, very accurately. So knowing that, we asked ourselves the question, sure, this is Hong Kong fin traders. They've never seen the shark, but they make their living off these fins. So maybe they're seeing something that the average person couldn't see. So that's what we were thinking, but in our DNA testing of fins, we started recognizing the differences. So we thought maybe this is something that almost anybody could do to some level, and that's what we set out to do, was to develop a guide that would be for customs people that don't have expertise in sharks, but we could show them what the key characters to look for these species actually are. So funded by Pew, Deborah and I did the Shark Fin Visual ID project. It was about an 18-month project. We went to all of these countries and probably more since then with the red triangles there. We looked at pretty close to 1,500 fins. I think it might even be more than that now. And we got fins from 41 different species, including all of the major ones in trade. In the fin trade, and all of the 5 CITES, now CITES listed species. And our initial goal from this project was to develop a very simple resource to identify the first dorsal fins of these CITES species. So the product, many of you have picked it up. This is the guide. And really the way this is supposed to be used is that customs people would go through the steps to identify fins, and that would give them, if they get a positive hit according to the guide, that would give them probable cause to hold the shipment and then contact an expert such as us or somebody in country, or do a DNA test or something like that to be able to verify and take it to court that this was in fact a CITES listed species. So we focus on first dorsal fins because those actually have the most obvious characters. So you might say, well, what about the other fins? The other fins can be identified as well, but we suggest focusing on the first dorsal fins because the other fins are likely to be in the same shipment or they're going to be traded as well. And no customs department checks everything, so the best strategy is to pick something that you can readily identify. So we recommend looking for the first dorsal fins for this. So I'm going to point out some scientific sort of landmarks on the fin, that because we're going to go through an exercise identifying some fins, so you need to know what I'm talking about when I talk about the landmarks. So the apex is the very top of the fin. The free rear tip is this sort of flap that comes out the back. The origin is where the fin starts. So you imagine this is the shark's back right here. This is the fin base, and this is the leading edge, and this is the trailing edge. So those are the terms that I might use when we're sort of describing how to identify these particular fins. I'm going to go over this in much more detail in the breakout session later, but obviously we have to tell them how to identify that it's a first dorsal fin. So pectoral fins have different colors. There's a dark side and then there's a light side. So if they see that characteristic, they know it's not a first dorsal fin. So you can see this one here this is a pectoral fin because it's different colors. This is a possible dorsal fin because it's the same color on both sides. And then the base of the fin looks different between dorsals and lower caudals. So I'll go over that in more detail in the breakout session. But what we're going to do now, Deborah and Carrie Lynn, we're going to give each table a fin, and we're going to walk through the guide, and we're going to pull out the CITES species in these fins. So if anyone has a weak stomach, feeling a bit queasy, now's the time to leave the room. All right, so every table gets one. And just because I said they're worth $150 a kilogram, I do need them back at the end. Okay, so somebody on every table has a fin, so just hold it up so we can all see them. Okay, so a lot of people get a picture of themselves holding the fin on the top of their head like this, and they put it on Facebook after the presentation if you want to put it on Facebook. Okay, what's that? Yeah, so these are all first dorsal fins that we're looking at. They're all first dorsal fins. All right, I'll give a couple minute or two to get pictures. You know what it is? I suspect you're slightly above average in your shark abilities. Oh, here we go. Facebook. So the fins that we have today, there are CITES species, and there's representatives of just about every other common species in the Hong Kong trade. So in addition to CITES, there's other ones. So what we're gonna do is every table, I'm going to go through the guide, and each table you answer the question yes or no, and we'll just follow through. And we'll see how it goes. Since I don't speak Spanish, we'll see how this works. So the first thing the guide tells you to look for is the fin uniform in color, or is there a distinct white or black mark somewhere on the fin? Obvious marking, it'll be black or white. So if you have a fin that has a very obvious black or white marking, hold it up. White, black, white, black. All right, perfect. All right, so those of you that have the black, the guide tells you if the marking is black, that is not a CITES species. That is not one of the CITES species. So you know if it's got that black marking, you don't have to worry about that fin, so you can put that down. All right, those of you that have a white marking, can you hold it up again? All right. So let me just move forward. So those of you with a white marking, is the apex white, the top bit? Anyone have a fin where this bit is white? So that's the apex. Anyone with one with this bit? Did we hand out a porbeagle? Oh, okay, sorry, I couldn't see you. All right, so if the apex is white, you've got one more choice. Is the fin very round, like this? Or is it very pointed, like a pointed triangle? Round? So let's see the round. Okay, so the round with the white patch, that's the oceanic white tip. So that's the one the Hong Kong traders can always get because no other shark has a big round fin with a big white patch. It's very, very obvious. So you guys get a prize. See Ugo for prizes. Wave to Ugo. All right. So back here we had one where the fin, the marking was white, but it was on this part, the free rear tip. So that's your fin. So everyone see the white patch there? So that's the porbeagle shark. So that's one of the other ones on CITES. So white patches means might be CITES. So white patch is very important. All right, so the rest of you have fins that are uniform in color. In the breakout session, I'll explain this measurement. We suggest a measurement because the hammerheads, they have very tall, thin fins. So they're taller than they are broad. So the width is greater than the height of the fin. So, let me see if I have a, no. So, does anyone have a fin that they would say, if you measure the base, it's going to be a lot less than the height of the fin? So you've got a tall, thin thing like this. You want to hold it up if you've got one? So you see that? And see at the very back? You see how tall, they're very tall and thin? See, somewhat like this fin here is very wide, so short and fat, and tall and skinny. So the fins that are tall like this, there's only a few fins, than the one at the back there. There's only a few, and those are the hammerheads. They're tall and skinny like that. They're also tend to be a light brown color. Is that time warning? Whoops, sorry. All right, so they have a light brown color, and their base is very distinctive. I'll go out with that in the breakout session. But basically, the hammerhead fins, they're tall, thin, brown. They really stick out. The traders can do them, and you guys just did it as well. So we're going to go very quickly. So as a recap, you're looking for white free rear tip, round with white patch on apex, or a fin that's tall like that. So this is going to be a competition. I'm going to show fins in rapid fire. If you see a CITES listed species, put your hand up. Ugo's the judge. First hand that goes up correctly gets a prize. All right? But this is only for CITES species. All right. You ready? I'm ready. You're ready, all right? Oh. All right. So no. All right. So black tip. See the black tip there? Yeah, so good, but it is tall, but it has a black tip, so you're good. All right, so we have one prize. Yep, that's the scalloped. That's a smooth hammerhead, I think. Yep. All right. Can't get two prizes. So that's the great hammerhead. Poor beagle. No. Black tip, but all right, so I think everyone sees that you can visually identify these fins. You don't have to be a Hong Kong trader to do it. What we're suggesting is that Border Control Customs will distribute this guide. It's going to be an iPhone app early next year. So you could do it on the phone. Whole idea is that they might see thousands of fins. They should be able to very quickly pick out which ones have the big white patches or very tall. And they'll get an eye for it, and they'll get good at it. Once they make that, they can hold the shipment. They can then do a DNA test if they need to. They can seek expert advice. So just to conclude, I know I'm probably over time now. Deborah and I have funding from a couple of foundations where we can come to countries in Latin America and teach customs people how to do this and talk about, help you figure out the fin trade in the country and how to do it. So if you have interest in arranging a session sometime in your country next year before September or after September, please get a hold of me. That's my email. I'll hand out cards at the breakout session, and we can start a dialogue and we can work it out and send some of our people to help you with the visual identification. You can find copies of this guide at this URL. And with that, I think it's John's turn. I'm already, I think, into your time.